Good evening and welcome, wherever you are, whatever your time zone, to the launch of Community Wealth Building 2.0, leading resilience and recovery in Preston. My name is Richard Slater. I'm the publisher of Lancashire Business View magazine, and I'm delighted to be hosting this event. And much as we'd love to be doing this in person, with a cup of tea and a slice of butter pie, the nature of the format does mean we are open to a global audience, and that's fitting. Because the truth is, the national and international spotlight has been on Preston since it launched its community wealth building programme. And that spotlight is reflected in the fact that we are joined tonight by speakers and guests with international, national, regional and local perspectives. So, community wealth building, known to many simply as the Preston model. Highlights have included a new approach to procurement, which has seen hundreds of millions of pounds added to the Preston and Lancashire economy by ensuring public sector opportunities can be secured by local businesses and organisations and delivered by their people for the benefit of all our communities. This commitment was an inspiration to our business, Lancashire Business View. It prompted us to launch a campaign to bring back £1 billion, to encourage the private sector to join the movement and be more neighbourly in their procurement. But community wealth building is much bigger than that. Increased training and employment opportunities, accreditation by the Real Living Wage Foundation, and support for greater diversity in business ownership, they are the other cornerstones. Now, Preston City Council is ready to launch the next phase, Community Wealth Building 2.0, leading resilience and recovery in Preston. And we want to share that story with you. And to help us do that, we've assembled a cast of guest speakers and panellists from New York to Oxford to Preston and beyond. We'll welcome J. Philip Thompson, Deputy Mayor of New York City, to share his community wealth building story. We'll hear from James Moore of Northwest Mutual, a regional bank owned by its customers and a central plank in community wealth building. We'll also hear from Paul Johnson, a Preston business owner who is both a contributor to and a beneficiary of community wealth building. And we have two panel discussions featuring politicians, placemakers, media, the skills and health sectors, and those on the ground implementing the principles of the Preston model. They'll be discussing the power of place and the power of people. If you have questions for any of our speakers, please share them in the chat box and we'll try to incorporate some of those. But to formally open this event, I spoke with Councillor Freddie Bailey, Cabinet Member for Community Wealth Building at Preston City Council. And here's what he said. Welcome, Councillor Freddie Bailey. This is the relaunch of the Community Wealth Building project for Preston, CWB 2.0, I think we're calling it. Freddie, welcome. Can you set the scene for us, Councillor? What are the motivations behind community wealth building, or the Preston model as it's known to many?
I guess our motivations are we just don't agree with our current economic direction as a country and as a Northwest and also as a city. And obviously what we want to do is we want to change that bit by bit, starting from the bottom up. So how we do that, we were trying to reach out to our communities and work out what exactly they need. It's not us coming up with the ideas, it's our communities coming up with the ideas and really building it brick by brick so that we benefit every single person. So if there's growth in one sector, not just the very few benefit from it, that all from society will benefit from that. So we improve and grow together as a city.
What examples did you consider before making the decision, this is for Preston?
Well, we obviously think it's for Preston because we think our residents deserve the best. Obviously, we think it's the best city in the world within the Labour group at Preston. And obviously, we want to give as much back for our residents as possible. And obviously, working with our anchor institutions, working with schools, the NHS, our university, and obviously our neighbouring councils and us, we can really work together to actually make the most benefit for all our residents.
What highlights would you draw out from the first few years of the first part of community wealth building for Preston?
So what we have seen increase in employment within Preston, and we've also seen an increase in wage far faster than the UK's average and also far exceeding the Northwest average. and that's just based in Preston, which is we're really, really pleased to see. And we're also seeing a higher percentage of increase of employees as well within Preston. So we're also driving the self-employed industry and the self-employed sector as well. So we're really reaching out across all sectors and having that multiplying effect and a really positive economics and creating more wealth.
You were very quick off the mark as a city council, Freddie, in terms of the push for a real living wage. How far is that underpinned? That feels to me like a foundation part of a project like this. How far would you agree with that?
Yes, I mean, that was really the first part of community wealth building. Way before I was a councillor, I was probably still in school at the time. But what the real living wage did was ensure that those who worked at Preston City Council got a proper wage that they could take home to their families. And obviously, it meant that they would build our economy, and obviously they'd spend that money and obviously invest it within our local economy. So it would build on that further. And obviously that's just grown, and we were the first council in the north of England to be a living wage employer.
How do you measure the impact that you're making?
I think the best way to measure it is through people. Sometimes economics isn't the best way there's not a clear way of measuring it. I mean, a lot of people look at stock shares or the FTSE 100, but a lot of the time that doesn't really affect the normal everyday person within Preston. And obviously what we're looking at doing is creating more jobs, speaking to our community, speaking to businesses, ensuring that local businesses get public contracts. And obviously by just speaking to them, it really shows that we are making a massive benefit to our city. And I think that's one of the best ways we can measure that.
The private sector, could we encourage them to buy more locally from within Preston or within wider Lancashire?
I mean, yes, you're exactly right. I mean, obviously with public sector procurement, procuring locally, it not only means that they have more money to invest within their workforce, but it also means it's upskilling the workforce of Preston. And that means that the private sector businesses can also look to Preston because we're more competitive, we're better equipped to deal with an ever-changing world, we're up and coming, and also as well, it also has other benefits in terms of helping your neighbour in a way. It's keeping it local, it's building that kind of friendship, you're working together, collaborating together, and also as well, it does have other effects in terms of environmental agenda as well. It can reduce our carbon footprint, which obviously everyone wants to see.
This event is titled Community Wealth Building 2.0, Leading Resilience and Recovery in Preston. What's new in version 2, Freddie?
What I'd say is new is turning those kind of concepts into actual ideas on the ground. And I think what we have changed is not just, we don't want to change the policies, what we want to change is the entire culture of our city. And that's the kind of ambitions we really have. Obviously, we're pledging more money into community wealth building ideas, and we're pledging more resources into that. And hopefully it will have a massive, massive impact within our city. And obviously, I think that's quite a good overview of what we're trying to do. Obviously, in the context of COVID, a lot of people obviously at risk of potentially losing jobs. There's a potential recession looming. And obviously, now we're moving towards a gig economy more than ever. I think people really want that more sense of job security. And I think that's why a relaunch is absolutely necessary to show that a new way, a new economic generation, a new economic idea has been born within Preston, and it's better than ever now.
Let's cast forward 5-10 years. When we get forward 5-10 years and we look back to now, what achievements do you expect to be celebrating?
I would love to build on our idea of a fair economy. So we still want to see wages increase in Preston, the number of jobs increase in Preston, but it's making sure that we're creating jobs that will benefit as many people as possible. We want to see more cooperatives within Preston, more democracy within our business sector, but also I think we want to see other ideas such as our local community bank, which obviously will look to invest in local people and businesses. But also I think we'd like to see a more inclusive economy that includes every single person or business and gives every single person and business the best option to succeed.
What does a Preston model mean to you personally, Freddie?
I think maybe as a younger person, I do think a lot of the time some people need a helping hand, and obviously others have a more unfair chance than other people. And I'd just like to live in a city where no matter where you're born, no matter how what your family background is, if you work hard, you will achieve just as much as your next door neighbour. And I think that's really important.
Councillor Freddie Bailey, what a fantastic start to a fantastic evening. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Freddie Bailey. Now, I said we had a global flavour to this evening's event, and it's my pleasure now to welcome Professor J. Philip Thompson, Deputy Mayor of New York. Deputy Mayor Thompson is a champion for inclusivity and for equality, for shared business ownership. He's an expert in urban planning. Community wealth building runs through his veins. Deputy Mayor, welcome to Preston.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. Deputy Mayor, could you tell us about your work? What are your areas of responsibility?
Well, I'm Deputy Mayor for Strategic Policy and Initiatives, and I oversee and drive strategy across about 17 different agencies. That includes small business, minority and women-owned business, immigrant communities, of which we have over 3.5 million immigrants in New York, people with disabilities, workers, veterans, consumers, youth, City University of New York, which has 500,000 students, and a few others.
Can you tell us what motivated you personally towards this agenda and what continues to drive you?
Well, I would say a couple of things. One is that people of color and women were virtually excluded from the benefits of the Industrial Revolution in the United States. Many of New York's residents, our grandparents and great-grandparents, were either stuck on a cotton plantation, on a banana plantation, or if they were women, they were locked in the kitchen and never even got to work in industry or join a union, any of that, or have a pension, none of that. And so with the green transition and with the increasing use of technology and digitization of our economy, I just don't feel like, 85% of our city can not be at the center of it and be on the periphery. So that's one thing. And I will just mention in New York, last 2 years ago, pre-pandemic, 1% of the population made 42% of the income of the entire city. And in the United States last year, 60 people made as much money as 1/2 of the entire population. So we have extreme inequality, has nothing to do with making the economy work for everybody. It's not working for everybody. And the last thing I will say is, you may have noticed the former President Trump tried to initiate a coup, literally, coup d'etat. And 3/4 of the Republican Party in the United States say that Biden was elected illegitimately, even though there's no evidence for that. And 40% of the Republicans say violence is justified to get America back the way they think it ought to be. And 40%.
How far do you think, Deputy Mayor, that the constructs and the values behind community wealth building, how far can they go to tackling some of those inequalities?
I think it's essential. Underlying Trump's support is economic anxiety. Working people, their incomes have been on a decline for 30 years, almost 40 years, with no hope in sight. And Trump and others like him blame Black people, blame immigrants, blame Latinos for why their lives aren't getting better and why their kids really don't have a future, because they don't have any real solutions or answers. They really are just, grabbing whatever they can for themselves and their friends, building an economic aristocracy. And so if we aren't going to end up fighting each other in this country, we're going to have to find new ways to rebuild our economy. And I will say, in New York, a couple of years ago, my staff got a secret phone call from a social service center where 400 children who had been separated from their parents at the Texas border were brought. And these were kids aged 9 months to 10 years old. And they were put in unsanitary facilities. They were given spoiled food. The staff was told they couldn't hold the kids, even though, like I said, some were infants. And so the kids were in total distress. And it was like a little concentration camp for children. That's where we're going if we don't find alternatives.
Deputy Mayor, is there not a huge irony here then? I reflect with limited knowledge, I accept, upon what I would consider to be some of the glory days of the United States. But those glory days were underpinned by proper taxation and by much less inequality. Would you agree?
No. There were glory days if you were a white male worker not in the South and you were fortunate enough to have a union card, and you were able to take advantage of the GI Bill after World War II and get subsidized housing and subsidized education and subsidized training. That didn't happen everywhere, and it wasn't accessible to everyone. It did show a model that could work for everyone. But part of the politics of America is, keep folks divided. So those programs were in effect racially segregated precisely so they wouldn't become national and embedded in every state and in every policy to keep that division going. So that's the challenge we're facing now. And I think community wealth building, part of that is tackling this problem of division with some people always getting left behind. And it used to be women, it used to be Black people. Now it's like 80%, 90% of the population getting left behind. So it's kind of learning the lesson that we got to be together if we're actually going to build an economy that works for everybody.
So when we consider the idea of community wealth building as a means towards resilience and recovery, how do you frame the narrative for individuals, businesses, and the neighborhoods in which they operate?
Well, I say that the only way that our grandparents and foreparents actually got anywhere was through solidarity, through working together. My family is African American, been in this country since at least the 1700s. After slavery, my dad was a minister. After slavery, Black people had no money, no property, and nonetheless built churches from one end of this country to the other, built universities. Tuskegee University was one of the first built. They had no money. What did they do? The students formed a brick making cooperative, made bricks. In the 1800s, after the Civil War, sold bricks, and literally brick by brick built Tuskegee University. And the architect and organizer was Valerie Jarrett, who was Obama's advisor's grandfather, who did that. I mean, all of us have direct experiences on how cooperation, solidarity enables us to survive and grow. And so it's just taking those lessons and applying them to today.
Thank you. I wonder then, it requires a partnership approach. It requires solidarity. Is there a central vision that can unite differing perspectives?
I think so. And the vision is that we need to have workers, community members, others who are in decision-making seats at all levels of our economy in order to ensure that all of our economic institutions are meeting the needs and goals set by the people themselves. And that's what democracy should mean. And if it doesn't mean that, we end up losing even our political democracy. And frankly, that's where we are in the United States. Our political democracy is in peril because of people are so disenfranchised from the economy, and the economy doesn't serve them anymore. So now they're willing to attack the political democracy. So economic democracy for us means period democracy. We can't have democracy without democratizing the economy. And the politics and divide and conquer, we have to overcome.
Thank you. There's a paper from your department, the Municipal Policies for Community Wealth Building, that's recently released. It's got a very strong focus on inclusive business ownership. I wonder, How have you kept that focus through the pandemic, and what results are you seeing?
Well, we come up really with a new idea like every week or every other week. But one of the things we've done is really we're offering up to $10,000 in technical assistance for business owners that want to sell their businesses to their employees. Many of these owners are near retirement age, and the pandemic has actually sped that up for many of them. They're just ready to do something else, and they don't have buyers often for their businesses, and they're more than happy to sell them to their employees. They don't know how. And there are a lot of workers who know the businesses inside out that are interested in owning those businesses. So we're facilitating that as a city. We're working with a firm that recently won approval to issue bonds for small businesses. In the United States, big corporations can issue bonds, small businesses can't. So we're going to initiate bonds for small businesses in which community members can buy a portion of a bond for as little as $15. And these businesses, the community will be partners. And when the businesses recover, the communities make a little more money, and we keep it going in that way. So we have a bunch of strategies that we're instituting that really kind of bypass the traditional Wall Street dominated financing structure, that enable community members to have more of a direct role in the economy and how we recover. When we sell property, we're now mandating, like for housing, that community and community-based businesses as well are required to own a portion of whatever is sold. So that the big businesses just can't come and have a scoop up properties because people are desperate right now, and consolidate ownership more in hedge funds and other private equity firms. So we're taking measures as fast as we can, as many as we can.
And has the pandemic affected the speed of that progress?
Well, let's put some urgency on the part of our local government. And, our folks are hurting. We have over 1 million people who've lost jobs. We have soup kitchens in every university now. We are funding 600 food centers to distribute food every day. We've distributed over 100 million meals just so people can eat. And we've gone into debt as a local government because the Trump administration wouldn't reimburse us for any of this. And now we're fighting in Congress over getting aid and also requiring that $15 an hour be a minimum wage, which, by the way, is only 2/3 of what the minimum wage was in 1968. But that's a big fight in our country right now because we've gone backward.
And that really puts into context, I guess, what you were saying earlier, Deputy Mayor, about the ownership resting in too few hands and the wealth resting in too few hands.
Absolutely. But you know what? We can change this. We have actually progressive Democrats who control our state legislature now. We have a progressive city council, a progressive mayor. There's the will. So what we really need to work on now is the how. And so that's why collaborations with folks like you all is really important for us. That's why, I was on the phone with Atlanta and Chicago 2 days ago. We're having a big event next week to say, let's figure out the how, because they're in the exact same situation. And then last week in the state of Texas, the entire grid went down. Millions of people didn't have heat or water with 18-degree Fahrenheit temperatures. Some people died. And that was because everything had been privatized. And there was no way for workers in communities to exercise any power over how they got their electricity or how they got their water. And it's just a learning moment for this whole country.
You've had extensive experiences working on community wealth building. And I wonder, what do you think we in Preston can learn from the experience of New York?
Well, one thing I would say is that, to me, you can't separate community wealth building and trying these new ideas from the politics. And I don't mean politics in the, necessarily political parties, but I mean the real community politics of how do you bring people together to think through solutions and not be divided by where your parents were born or what language you speak at home or what kind of food you eat. But really, what do you want to see in your future for your children and your families? That is like really what needs to happen in order to build the will. And then we'll have enough muscle to actually institute new policies. So that's how we're approaching this. It's a really organizing kind of effort, as well as, it's not something government just does top down. It won't work that way.
Now, community wealth building is an international movement. And I wonder, have you taken any learnings from our work here in Preston?
Well, you're experimenting with, municipal finance. That's something, we're following. I would say the biggest thing is that local government can itself be an economic engine. In the United States, people are enamored with this neoliberal theory of marginalism and price determines value. It used to be that labor and workers determine value in the 19th century. Now it's like whatever people get paid, that's what they're worth. And government doesn't get paid, so it must not be worth anything. That's how people think here. And we are just having to fight that. And Preston has been inspiring in that sense. Government creates value. Government solves problems often that markets can't solve. Government provides essential ingredients like for broadband or like for infrastructure, or sometimes you can't get a green car company, a battery car company to locate in a city because there's no recharging station. And you can't get the recharging companies to locate in a city because there aren't enough battery cars to do it. So you need government to step up and say, you know what, we can solve this problem. We'll actually make the infrastructure happen, and then the car company has a reason to be here and things will move. And so having an activist government has been inspirational for us.
Thank you. I have a question here from our audience, from a student in our audience. What strategies, Deputy Mayor, has New York City, alongside community wealth building, has New York City and other cities, what strategies have been used to ensure different groups have equal rights and access to the city and to its facilities?
We've created a task force, which is co-chaired by me, another deputy mayor, and the First Lady of New York, called the Task Force for Racial Equity and Inclusion. And we have launched over 50 initiatives based on our reaching out to 600 community-based organizations in diverse communities across the city and soliciting their ideas, what they want to see happen. And we're continuing to generate new projects, new ideas from this task force, which includes every single agency and women and people of color from every single agency in the city. They generate ideas, and then we put the city's resources and muscle behind those ideas. So that's one of the things we're doing.
And I have another question. This is from Ralph, who I think is in Virginia. Ralph in Virginia, I guess, what are the first steps that he can invoke in Blacksburg, Virginia, towards community wealth building movement in his area? In fact, how do we persuade anybody that community wealth building is a journey worth embarking?
Well, one of the things that we worked on, and I worked on even prior to being in city government in New York, was to take leaders, including labor leaders, community group leaders, elected officials, on learning journeys. And so I think we organized 5 trips to Mondragon, Spain. We organized trips to Brazil. We organized trips to different places where people were doing these things. And actually, that got folks super excited. They wanted to learn more. Most folks, frankly, they don't get it from reading a book or an article, most. They need to see it and feel it and talk to people. So for us, that was the first step.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Deputy Mayor, it's been our pleasure to welcome you to Preston this evening. We wish you well on your journey with community wealth building, with healing the divisions, and thank you again for joining us in Preston. Good evening to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll stay in touch. New York is watching you. Thank you.
And we're watching you too. Thanks so very much, sir. Good night. Now, our first panel conversation this evening, thank you to Philip once again. Our first panel conversation this evening is here to consider the power of people. And to give us a national perspective, would you please welcome our guests? Neil McInroy. He leads the Centre for Local Economic Strategies with a mission to develop progressive economics for people, planet and place. John McDonnell MP has been a Member of Parliament for Hayes and Harlington since 1997, and he served as Shadow Chancellor from 2015 to 2020. Rachel Shabby is a print and broadcast journalist and a commentator with a specialism in the human stories that require multiple perspectives, which challenge assumptions and which cross cultural divides. And Councillor Matthew Brown was elected as leader of Preston City Council in 2018, having served since 2002. He's the driving force behind the Preston model. Good evening to you all. Can I start with you, Neil McInroy? What is community wealth building responding to, and what problems does it seek to solve?
Well, great. Nice to be here. Thanks, Richard. Good questions. Well, there's two reasons, really. The defining feature of all economies is wealth. Who has it, and where does it go? And the guru, if you like, of community wealth building, Ted Howard, who is the Vice President of the Democracy Collaborative, uses that phrase, where does wealth go and who does it? So what community wealth building is saying implicitly, hold on, the wealth is disappearing somewhere else. It's not landing with people and it's not landing in the right places. Now, there's some historical fact that's interesting. If you look at the totality of wealth, it's been and wealth comes through wages, yeah, but wealth also comes in terms of who owns the capital and who owns the finance. It's as low as it's been since the 1850s. The 1850s, the days of dark satanic mills, it's less than 50% comes back in wages. Yeah, most of it is squirreled away in terms of finance and who owns the means of production, if you like. So we have a massive wealth problem. 10 of the richest men own the same amount of wealth as half the population of the world. The 5 richest families in the UK own the same amount of wealth as 14 million of us. Never in human history been such concentration of wealth. So it's not just enough to think about redistribution of wealth. We need to give people a genuine stake and own more of that wealth. That's why co-ops and different forms of ownership are so key. And the second thing, Richard, that's important of why this is so important agenda is the word economy comes from the Greek word oikonomos, keeper of the household. Yeah, it's a social construct. We should be able to create the economy any way we want. It's a human, it's not a natural science. We can create the economy any way we want. It's actually become detached from us. We need to remake that economy that works for us. And the wealth flows through us as individuals, flows through our communities, flows through our families. That's the way we need to construct the economy. And that's what community wealth building is responding to.
The way you describe it there, Neil, you make it sound like it's a common sense conversation that we're having here. And I wonder, these are complex issues, but is sometimes the common sense approach the right one?
Yes, it is common sense. You know, it's common sense that if we create economic wealth, that we enjoy the fruits of that. And I'll give you a little anecdote, actually, Richard. We've been on this journey for many years now, not just with Preston, but before that. And in 2008, I visited Director of Economic Development in a poorer northern location. And I asked him, this is the area of public sector money buzzing around, before austerity. And I asked him, how's it going? He goes, oh, I've got lots of regeneration money come in, new business park, Tesco's is going to be opening, blah, blah, blah. And I go, sounds great. He goes, you know what? It's not really changing people's lives. Low wages, consultants, shareholders. The money, in Scottish phrase, was scooshing away, flying away. Yeah. So it is common sense. And that's why the pillars of community wealth building, where does the money go when you buy things, public sector? What wages have we got? What about finance? Yeah, big banks, community, the finance help our engineer our creativity. What about land and property assets? Who own them? And of course, ownership. Who owns? Can we get more co-ops, more community employee-owned businesses, and so forth? And of course, the proof of the pudding's in the eating, isn't it? How common sense it is. That's why dozens of areas are doing it across the UK. That's why New York City's doing it. That's why Atlanta's interested, Chicago's interested. That's why North Ayrshire's doing. That's what Fife's doing. That's what the Scottish Government has a community wealth building as part of its programme for government. It's just common sense. The problem is that it's common sense, but it's a direct attack on those who have wealth and power and keep it to themselves. That's that they say, oh, it's madness. Oh, it doesn't make any sense. Oh, that's just communism, whatever you want to call it. That also tells us something.
Neil,
they're losing influence in this process. That's what they're attacking it.
Thank you very much, Neil. I wonder, John McDonnell, I wonder if I can move it to you. How do you feel community wealth building can support a local, a regional, and even a national economy?
Just building on from Neil's principles there, really. I remember when Matthew Brown first raised community wealth building with me years back. And by the way, let me just pay tribute to Matthew. I'll embarrass him. The work he's done is just phenomenal. It's taken Preston on an economic plane and put it not just on the national map, but globally. You know, the reference is the Preston model. Cast your mind back to what Matthew and the council were facing, 10 years ago, nearly. First years of austerity, a government that was putting more responsibilities onto a council, but less resources, and then pushing councils to put their services outsourced or privatized. And what was happening is that you had large corporations effectively coming along thinking, well, this is a wonderful area for us to make profits. And the way we make profits is we cut wages, we undermine working conditions, and actually we're not that bothered about the service quality as long as we can get away with it and we keep out of the headlines. And they were just, money was being taken out of your local economy. And I have to say as well, it wasn't fair across the country either. You know, the North in particular weren't getting the investment from central government. At the same time, you were all being ripped off by these corporations. Matthew comes along with this very simple proposal, exactly as you said, Richard, common sense. Why don't we simply use the money that we've got to employ people locally, invest locally, and why don't we all come together to do that? And what that did, it lit a spark. It started to transform your own local economy because you're saying, rather than have these people take profits out of us, why don't we use all those resources locally? Why don't we employ local people in local firms? And it started to turn the local economy. And the point that you're making, Richard, is others have started to learn from it. So exactly as Neil has said, it's spreading, Neil, isn't it? Right the way across the country, others have taken up the idea. And it is also laying down the principles of what central government should be doing as well. So not only can you transform your local economy, you can actually then combine with others to change a region and then a nation. One other point, it wasn't just about access to resources from central government and corporations ripping you off. I have to say the finance sector was as well. You know, local businesses, if they wanted to expand or they wanted to just invest themselves, then they need to borrow, or individuals, they were going to the national institutions, the finance sector, either through the banks or through credit agencies or through payday loans, and they were being ripped off at high interest rates. I think the brilliant idea of coming together and setting up your own local bank and then also harnessing the pension fund money, I just think it's superb. I took the ideas that Matthew were developing and actually we inserted into the Labour Party policy making. And Neil knows this. We actually then started looking at a national investment bank. So that would provide resources at local level relatively cheaply in comparison. And in that way, you were investing in the local economy. I like the ideas that Matthew came up with as well about developing the cooperative economy so everyone shares in that wealth. You know, and it isn't just about making sure that people get a decent wage. It's actually feeling a sense of ownership. It's what Neil said, a feeling you're in control of your own future in that way. I think it's a huge breakthrough. And the thing is as well, it doesn't matter how difficult the times are, the concept is going to go on. I think it'll develop because it's become so popular as well. Even in the difficult times of the COVID crisis, actually in terms of the COVID crisis, this sort of approach is needed more than ever. And now we face the next major crisis, the existential threat of climate change. What better than to harvest your resources better this way so that when you are investing, you're using the resources so effectively, but the benefit is coming back to you, but also you're controlling it. It is under local community control.
And everything you just said there, John, everything touches with one of the objectives of version 2 of community wealth building. Can I come to you, Rachel Shabby? You're a journalist, you're a broadcaster, and really simple question. Why is Preston a story?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and be interested to find out what others on this panel think as well. But I think for me, there were two big components of it. One is related to that common sense thing that others have been talking about, and which I think Matt Brown refers to as extreme common sense. So the first thing is this light bulb moment about the Preston model. I remember hearing about it for the first time around 2017. I was in conversation with one of the then Labour leadership's advisors, and they were talking about what economic levers Labour in government could activate in order to tackle things like, poverty wages, insecure work conditions, and just more widely the sort of painful wealth inequality we have in this country, which also cuts across racial and across regional lines. And so in this long list of levers, one of the things that came up was, and we could, look at implementing the Preston model, to which I said, well, wait, what? Back up a minute. What's the Preston model? And the minute it was explained, it was just so immediately obvious and tangible. And you immediately just thought, well, why aren't councils that are able to across the country doing this right now? So that's the light bulb moment that the Preston model has. And I think the other component that makes it such a news story is the sense of agency. So when we talk about areas such as Preston, but also other regions in the country that have had experiences of just long economic decline, followed by ravaging austerity, and just being put into horrible financial conditions where people are impoverished and daily life is just a struggle. And there's a sort of there's a sort of lack of power in that equation when that's described, because all those things are done to regions by a disconnected and neglectful centralized government. All of that is true, but then something like the Preston model brings back agency to communities. So, you don't have to wait for central government to help. You don't even need their permission, right? You can just start up and do things immediately by the community, for the community. And I think that's a really powerful part of the Preston model as well.
Thanks, Rachel. If I can come to you, Councillor Brown. Matthew, that do-it-yourself aspect, that agency aspect is perhaps not as well expressed as it might be. And I thank Rachel for that. It's getting hold of something for your own ends and bringing your community together. How important was that as a driver for you, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, there was a sense in 2011, as John just said before, that, we got government cutting back, and the big developer-led approach we used to regenerate our city centre, that wasn't forthcoming. So there was some sense in that we had no control, because government's not wanting to give you any more money and you're having to cut your budget every year, and then big business doesn't want to come in. So we just decided in Preston at the time, we want to bit by bit put layers and work with partners to actually have that resilience and actually build our local economies from the grassroots upwards. And, the motivation was the levels of inequality in our community. I mean, at the time, and it's probably not an awful lot better, some parts of Preston, the most deprived parts, you can expect to live to about 66, 68, and in other parts, it'd be 85 or so. It's not dissimilar to some cities in America where there's actually that lack of opportunity. So I came to the conclusion, and also, colleagues in the cabinet like Councillor Rawlinson, who's the cabinet member for Finance and Resources, that we have to try and change the system locally as much as we can to actually put that democracy and resilience. So a lot of it was working with what we have already. So we're lucky to have 2 councils here, University Hospital, get them to pay a living wage, get them to work with local companies. But now we're on the really exciting stuff around, having more worker-owned companies, establishing our own bank, building stuff like a cinema that will be owned by the city, looking at community land trusts, looking at district heating. Some of it has been done and some of it's in the process of being done.
And
a
how
big
much?
part of this,
Please carry on.
a big part of this event is actually this stuff has been going on, but it's been happening in different places with the council and its partners. And we obviously need to do a lot more to engage the public in it, because the public are aware of it. But obviously, I think not having a strategy where people can actually get involved and actually join in these policies, I think it's really essential in Preston.
Thanks, Matthew. Could you just bring your boom mic just a touch closer to your mouth, if that's what it is? Thanks very much. We talked about about inequality. I wonder, how far does that stretch to an idea of inequality of opportunity?
Well, it does. I mean, it's there's huge inequalities of opportunity in Preston. So it's but I just feel we've got to go beyond that. I think we need some level of inequality of outcome, because we've got to have a situation where there is outcomes in our economy where there isn't that gap between rich and poor that we have in our city, and that child poverty, the outcomes in terms of people, children in poverty and other things, people in jobs, our employment rate, unemployment, that it's actually reducing. And I think this idea about equal opportunity, I'm not sure it actually takes us where we need to be. I think we need equality of outcome in the local economy. And the pandemic's exposed that, Richard, in the sense that, if you're serious about tackling, racial injustice, you've got to change the economic system, as Phil Thompson said. The fact that if you look at the ownership of the economy, it is really unequal between rich and poor. But if you talk about ethnic minority communities, they tend to have even less ownership than the white poor often. So you've got to really try and put more ownership in the hands of local people in different ways which they control.
Thank you very much. I wonder if Councillor Bailey outlined some of the direction for version 2.0. I wonder what's exciting you most on behalf of the people of Preston about this enhanced community wealth building model.
Yeah, there's excitement, but there's also a bit of an anxiety about what we're going to face as we come out of the pandemic. And, it really is an urgency to make sure that community wealth building actually helps us recover. And that's going to be really practical things like going to the hospital and the council and the university saying, can you recruit people who might have lost jobs during the coronavirus pandemic? Can you look to recruit people of a minority community and people in the most deprived areas? Really practical things, but crucially, it's trying to build that understanding and resilience where people actually do want to take control of their own businesses. So we've got new worker co-ops in Preston. There's 4 now incubated: an education centre, taxis, digital, and also the larder, which is a food business. So what we want to do is we want to actually expand that, so we get 10 or 20. So instead of being dozens employed in worker-owned businesses, it's going to be hundreds. So people take control of their own economic destinies. And also the bank, Councillor Bailey today, fantastic. It was a confidential report, but we're actually investing further in our own banks. So the community is in charge of its own money, because the large banks caused the economic crash of 2007-8. And from that, we had austerity, because in Preston and elsewhere, people had to pay £20,000 to bail out the financial system. Now, in Germany, where they got not-for-profit banks that lend to local businesses like yours, Richard, these things were avoided. So we're trying to create an awareness that there are alternatives out there. It doesn't have to be this way, and we can actually introduce a number of policies and get support for them at local level and change the system where we are, because the current one isn't working for people.
Thank you very much. This is a question for you all, and perhaps I'll start with Neil with this one. How we are dealing in some high concepts. We talk about businesses, we talk about government, we talk about bank, we talk about spend, we talk about this. How do we keep our focus on the people part of this story, Neil?
Well, I think what's key here is that the economy should be made and by and for the people. And that's where Philip was talking about, and everyone was talking about economic democracy, workplace democracy, a say in economic strategy. Every pound that gets spent in the public sector surely is our money. So there has to be this porosity, this accountability. And I think that is kind of key. That's how you get great resilient societies. That we're not just our opportunities, our life courses, not just the vagaries of getting a wage. It's we've got a genuine stake in that place. Today I was in the Western Isles, metaphorically, of course, virtually, 75% of the land in the Western Isles is owned by communities. It's owned by those people. Now that gives an amazing amount of resilience, doesn't it? Because what happens on that land, the return that land comes to them. So, and if you look at that compared to England, we don't even know who owns England, let alone getting our hands on any of it. So
Thanks.
it's porosity and accountability and getting us all a stake in that economy.
Thank you very much. And Rachel, to you again, as a journalist, often it's the job of the role of the journalist to translate the high concept and make it about people, because people is news, frankly. I wonder how you feel about that. How do you keep a focus on the people behind the story as well as the concepts of the story?
Yeah, you'd hope so, wouldn't you? I mean, I think what there's two parts to this. One is to, in a way, I suppose we're challenging a long-standing sort of orthodoxy of market value and bringing in social value. So quite often around progressive procurement, you'd hear people say, but you know, what if it meant local authorities aren't getting the best deal? To which you think the reply is, but on what terms? Yeah. You know, what does the best deal mean? Is it purely financial, or is it a company that pays the minimum wage and commits to recruitment that focuses on deprived areas and minority areas, who both those communities are obviously the most worst affected by the pandemic? Do you procure from a company that has the green audit and is committed to looking at its carbon footprint? So bringing in that concept of social value, I think, brings people back into the equation and makes it relatable. But I think also the people element is what people are saying anyway at the moment in terms of the pandemic. People are thinking along the lines that the community wealth building projects are talking about. People are saying that they're thinking about wanting to spend locally, wanting to shop locally, wanting to support local businesses. They're talking about wanting to feel more a part of the community. These are the sentiments that are coming up as a result of the pandemic. So it's about basically reconnecting that to politics and the economy, rebuilding that muscle memory of collectivism that is starting to come back to life because of the pandemic, and can now be reconnected to projects that are based along the Preston model.
Thank you, Rachel. John, if I can come to you, this is a question from Charlie in our audience. Charlie wants to know, can there be a technical role for the state in community wealth building? Can it be beneficial without inciting a top-down approach? And my kicker on that is, given that we've talked about common sense, does it matter what colour rosette is flying over Westminster for us to really consider this and take it seriously?
Don't get me going on that one, okay? Because we could have a real debate. Because actually, never mind. Look, as you know, I was the Shadow Chancellor. If we'd have gone into government, we would, on the basis of what Matthew's advice really, we would have put together a community wealth building team nationally, purely and simply to spread ideas out. And I think that's what the government needs to do now, because people ask about the Preston model. Mm-hmm. And what we need nationally is someone to facilitate the learning of lessons from all the different experiments that are going on, because there'll be other local authorities in other areas that will want to experiment in different ways. And the role for government nationally is not to interfere, is to provide resources, of course, but also it is to share information and share expertise. And I think that's the role of government. I'm hoping even under this government, they'll learn some lessons about that. But the point that I think Matthew is ahead of the game on all of this, really. And it's the point that people have made in all the meetings I've had about the Preston model. The creativity of people is absolutely staggering. When you give them the resources, and the point that Neil, you enable people to participate, the creativity is absolutely incredible, buzzing with ideas. Some will flop, just as they would in the private sector, or anything like that, but most will, I think, come to fruition. And that's the role of the state, is to provide the resources through a progressive taxation system, of course, but then allow those resources to be used at the very local level and use the creativity of people to do that. And in that way, people have a sense of ownership and you get so much better out of it. One point I'd like to make, though, you do have to have the resources from central government to ensure that you've got that foundation of resource to enable people to do that. And one of the things that came out of the discussions that Matthew pointed out very early on is actually the unfairness of the distribution of resources regionally within our country. You know, Lancashire in the northwest was getting something like a third of what was being invested in terms of transport for London and the southeast. You can't go on like that. So one of the things that you've been able to do with the Preston model is bring people through, not just to participate locally, but to have a voice nationally as well. And I think that's significant. In terms of this government, you know, it's, as I say, don't get me going on it, but what we've got to do is create a climate of opinion where whoever's in government is investing in this sort of initiative, because, as you say, it's common sense and actually it's so effective as well. Final point I'll make, the pandemic has made it even more critical now. If we've learned anything from the pandemic, actually it is, I keep saying to people, we've learned we care for each other, but we've also learned we need each other. And where we've had those needs, it's been the local state, the local council, the local health service that's provided the services that we need. So that investment at the local level is absolutely key. And I think it's basically told us, actually, the society that we want out of this pandemic has got to be based on that sense of community that community wealth building is based upon.
Thank you, John. And to you, Matt, I've got a couple of questions here which I'd like to combine. This is from Fiona Hornby. How can we bring councils together with shared procurement services on this journey? Does it become harder to localise spend when you are in a shared procurement agreement?
My understanding is it will be, but what we've done in Preston is obviously we've worked with all the public bodies, or as many as we can get hold of, and got them to get together and get involved in strategies with the same aim. So that is buying a lot more from local SMEs, local businesses, buying from, you know, cooperatives, social enterprises, charities, getting social value in the environmental benefits to the community, a real living wage, trade union recognition, and, you know, have those broad principles, but each institution's going to want to do it in its own way. And the really good thing about Preston, and it's probably a benefit in some ways, that as a council we're actually quite small comparatively to, you know, say ones in London which are unitary and they got budgets of 400 or 500 million. We've had no choice but to actually work with the hospital, university, have bigger budgets to actually bring that to scale, really, and that's been an advantage, really. So even if you're not a big player in the local economy, if you get others to inspire other people to do what you want to do, then it can make a big difference to people's lives.
Thanks, Matthew. And just finally, if I can, just a bit of advice really is being sought by Councillor Ron Cooper in Skelmersdale in Lancashire. Ron is chair of their CWB programme, their Community Wealth Building programme, at its early stages. The question is, Matthew, would you advise we should start with just the council procurement, which is under our control, or should we bring all the anchor institutions in from the start?
Well, the way we did it is obviously we were looking at our own spend, but as was said, myself and Neil and Martin and one or two others met in a pub, and that's where we worked with Cles as a third party, really, who then went round the other institutions with often myself, but often with council officers like Derek, who was involved in this project, and we got them all behind us. So, you know, the police, the county council, biggest housing association, further education colleges, now university and hospital. And if you get them all together to look where they're spending money and want to ripple that through your local community, it's really effective. So, you know, what we've done in Preston is done that. And then we've got other policies, more radical ones now on top of it, really. So that's why I think we're getting a lot of the attention we're getting. But, you know, it's really about delivering that change on the ground, to be honest. But this is crucially an economic movement now that is in the Northwest. It's across England and the UK, but it's also international too. You know, these ideas weren't mine. They came from Cleveland, Ohio with Ted Howard and others. And then they came from Mondragon before that, the worker cooperative community in Spain, really. So there are alternatives out there to capitalism itself, really. And people think that's scary, but if you actually visit these communities and these regions, you actually see that people are happier, they live longer, they're less stressed, and there's a sense of gentleness with everyone because they've actually took control of their own economy and they've got that democracy in the place that they live, you know. So it's fascinating to learn about. And, you know, I was inspired and I got a bit obsessed with it, as you can probably tell. And that really, so I thought, well, I want to I want to bring that change here, you know, and the ideas are brilliant, but now is the time to implement it. And we're doing that, to be honest, in Preston.
You call it obsessive, I call it tenacious, and I just love the idea of Matt Brown walks into a pub, there's two public sector buyers there, and they come out with a community wealth building model. Come on, that's how it starts. It starts with a drink in a pub. Everybody, this first panel, it's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your inspiration, your advice, your expertise, all that insight, all that good stuff. Thank you ever so much. Now, the next portion of our conversation leads on quite nicely, in fact, because we've heard a little bit about finance throughout so far. And let's be honest, the glue that binds together many of the pillars of community wealth building is money. It can't be done without finance. But there's money and there's money. So to tell this part of the story, I spoke with James Moore of the North West Mutual Bank. James Moore, thanks ever so much for joining us on this, the relaunch of the Preston Community Wealth Building Model 2.0. James, I wonder if you could tell us about your work and where you sit as an organisation or a business in the finance environment.
Yeah, we are setting out to create a different sort of bank, one that's owned by its customers, accountable to the people in the business that use it, and one that's based and only operates in the northwest of England. You find these banks everywhere across the world, but sadly not here, and we're looking to put that right.
So we've got the northwest of England. Clearly, Preston is our focus today. Who are our neighbours who are also taking part?
Well, if you look at it, the area that we're going to cover stretches from the Wirral in the south to the current Scottish border in the north. So up that sort of west coast of England. So you've got a fascinating mix of quite urban down south, and then it goes up into the rural of Cumbria. Fantastic. So, and it's a bank that's big enough to be successful and sustainable, but close enough to the people that it understands them.
So you've talked about how it's a project or a program that is used in other places around the world.
Yeah.
Clearly, it's something we're moving towards here in Preston. I wonder what was the motivation? What were the touch points that made us think this is something that will work in the northwest of England?
I think the sad thing is that though we don't have these local banks, we're the ones that invented them. And you find them all over Germany, and the Germans copied us. So in the 19th century, we had a thing that morphed into what came the TSB, and that was local banks in local areas. And then over time, we lost them. And when I speak to the Germans, they laugh and they say, "Thanks very much." Why did you get rid of them?
We also gave them football, James, and look what they did with that. What differentiates you then from the way you work in regards to the traditional bank, traditional banking processes? Basically, why is it important that the Northwest Mutual is here?
Yeah, I think that the most valuable, important, and hardest thing a bank does is earn trust. And I think that trust gives people a foundation and a confidence to make investment decisions and to manage their money well. And by trust, I mean that they believe this organization will be aligned with them. It's trying to achieve the same things for the same reasons. When things go wrong, it'll be benevolent. It's not going to sort of do you over and take advantage of it. And the reason we've got all this kit sitting behind us is it's got to be competent. You've got to believe that when your money goes in and your payments need to go out, it will happen. And I think if you have those, you'll have a trustworthy bank.
So you have to building credibilities at this point, which is a big ask for something that's a new project. How do you share those benefits with people who are new to an idea?
I think that one of the key things is I think most people have a strong view about banking. They generally think the banks are competent. Your money generally goes in, generally comes out. But I think people are dissatisfied on the other two. They don't think they're aligned with them. They don't think they act benevolently. And I think they're remote. And I think to explain to people that we want to have a useful, trustworthy thing that's of your place, of your people, is a benefit that's easy to understand. I think you're absolutely right. The next bit is, how would you make sure this thing is trustworthy? How can those people have the confidence that you're not going to lose their money?
But I think, as you say, this is your part of your task, isn't it? And you're right, you've got equipment behind you that feels and looks familiar, and in which case, I guess that's part of the trust conversation.
Yes, it's part of that. And it is very, very difficult to get the Bank of England to agree that you should be a bank. So it's only after a 2-year process of having everything looked at, having the people approved, checking all the details, will the Bank of England say, okay, you can be a bank. And that's a great deal of confidence for people. You can't just open as a bank. It takes a long, hard process.
Thanks, James. James, our themes at this evening's event include power of place, include power of people. But I wonder, on place, how can your work support regional resilience and recovery, which is another one of our themes this evening?
Yeah, I looked up the definition of power, and it's the ability to do or to act. And many of the things that places want to do or people want to do require money. And the place that buys, if you want to buy a house, equip your business, save up for a holiday, is money. And at the heart of money is a bank. It's where it's stored, it's where it's moved around, it's where the decisions are made as to who's going to get a loan, who's going to be excluded, and who's going to be included. So I think if you want to have control in a place and for power for people, and you need a bank for the money parts of that. It's not the whole picture, but it's an important part of it.
That takes us to another place, I guess, because a bank is an institution, a business, a community. What we mustn't lose sight of is the fact that within all those sections, we're talking about people, aren't we? That fundamentally, this is a people story.
Very much so. And I think that one of the reasons that we've gone for creating banks that are owned by their customers is to put those people right at the heart of it, to give them a voice. So it's not just a theoretical, it's a people's bank. It really is. If you don't like what the bank's doing, if you don't like what the directors are being paid, if you don't like the direction it's going, you have a voice. And because it's one member, one vote, you have power. You have the ability to do.
In that sense then, James, if I can push that forward, could you give us an idea, a sense of the range of the ways that you can work with individuals, with community groups or neighbourhoods, as Philip Thompson might have described it earlier, and businesses? So how can we operate across those three distinct fields?
Yeah, I think that the key to how this bank will be engaged with people in places is a fundamental part of it is to have branches. And for in those branches, there will be local people who are able to make decisions. And their job is very simple. It's to know the people in the place better than anyone else. So that when it comes to making those nuanced decisions, they are in the better place to do it. And they are the key decision makers within the bank. It's not someone sitting in the City of London. It's not someone sitting in front of a computer screen. It's those people. And I think that's how they engage.
I think finally, perhaps, James, how closely do the aspirations of Northwest Mutual fit with the aspirations of Preston's community wealth building model, or the Preston model as it's familiarly known?
I think it's an integral part. I think they're completely aligned. This is an essential foundation. I mean, the clue is in the wealth bit. A lot of wealth, it's not exclusively money, but a lot of it is. And if you want to genuinely have community wealth building, somewhere to retain it and to store it and protect it, you need a bank like this.
James Moore, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
Thank you again to James Moore there. Now, our second panel of the evening is focusing on the power of place, taking a more localised view of community wealth building. And joining us are Sharon Robson of Lancashire Teaching Hospitals NHS Trust. She's Director of Lancashire Procurement Cluster, which leads on purchasing for the county's hospitals. Steve Fogg rose from apprentice to Director at BAE Systems. Until recently, he was Chairman of Lancashire Enterprise Partnership, and now he's just taken a position as the Chair at Blackpool Teaching Hospitals NHS Trust. Professor Ebrahim Adia, or IBI, is Pro-Vice-Chancellor at the University of Central Lancashire and Chair of Lancashire Teaching Hospitals NHS Trust. He's also served several senior positions as an elected representative. And Nital Parekh is perhaps best described as a community ambassador. She's a teacher and a broadcaster, and Nital works to bring communities together to improve their prospects. Now, if I can come to you first, Sharon Robson, can you give us a sense of the budgets you work with in Lancashire and how you have adopted progressive procurement policies? Oh, I think I've lost Sharon. We've just lost. Sharon,
Is that better?
Oh, yes. Shall we go again? Let me try again. Can you give us a sense of the budgets you work with in Lancashire and how you have worked with and adopted progressive procurement policies?
Certainly. So good evening, everyone. It's absolutely wonderful to be here this evening. This is something that I feel really very, very committed to. And before I start, I'm going to say something that possibly you've never heard before. I am absolutely passionate about public sector procurement. And the reason for that is because when we get our public sector procurement right, we can absolutely transform services for our communities and use our public pound to extract maximum value in terms of social benefit for our communities. So that's a bit of a blur. That's who you're talking to this evening. Okay. So in terms of our income across our 3 trusts, so that's Lancashire Teaching Hospitals, East Lancashire Hospitals and Blackpool, we have an income of in the region of about 1.3 billion. That isn't everything that we can spend, that is income. Our influenceable spend, which is the money that we can actually make a difference with, is in the region of about 75 million per trust. So I lead a team along with the trust leadership groups in the region of 225 million. Okay, in terms of the challenges, well, we all know the NHS is a fantastic institution, and I'm very, very proud to be part of the NHS, but it is incredibly complex, and it's also very, very dynamic too. So I think one of the complexities and constraints for us is the fact that there's always historically been very, very focused on healthcare and hasn't necessarily understood that there is a bigger picture out there. I'm delighted to say that in terms of the local leadership within Lancashire, that is absolutely no longer the case. And we've got real commitment for our trust to become really progressive partners in terms of becoming one of those anchor institutions across Lancashire. The other issue, which I'm sure all of our local businesses are very familiar with, is public procurement contract regulations and some of the constraints that places on us in terms of public procurement. And just to talk about some of the things that we've already changed within our trusts, we've already changed our standing financial instructions so that we can actually introduce more local suppliers on our smaller bids. We're about to launch our new website from the 1st of April, whereby we can actually start publishing our current contract registers and our forward procurement plan. One of the difficulties we always have in the NHS is because we're so dynamic and focused on moving quickly, we're not necessarily, we could improve in terms of our forward planning a little in terms of procurement. So one of the key issues for myself and my team is making sure that we've got that forward procurement plan and we publish it to the marketplace so that local SMEs can actually get themselves into a tender-ready position.
I think the level of transparency, Sharon, it'd be really, really well received by the business community.
Absolutely, totally agree. The other thing that we're wanting to do as part of that website is engage much more proactively, both in terms of e-learning packages, but direct engagement with the market. So things that I used to do when I worked in Greater Manchester was, training towards helping to provide bid training for SMEs. I'm looking for a cohort of SMEs to help me train my own procurement teams, okay? Because my procurement teams say our documentation's fantastic, but actually if you sit them down with a bunch of SMEs who can absolutely pick those tender documents apart and say, actually, we just need them to be in a little bit more like plain English. So really interested if anyone wants to put their name forwards to help me in educating our teams. Thank you. And any other bidders too, because we can do this. We work across 3 trusts. We've got a big profile there, so all newcomers welcome, to help us make the way in which we engage with the marketplace more accessible, particularly for SMEs.
Thank you, Sharon, there for explaining in part some of the challenges that are faced. We've got issues of the way we procure, the way we talk to our SME community, and it's good to see that those are being challenged. But at the same time, you've had some real success stories with in recent times, and particularly through the pandemic months. And I wonder if you could share one or two of those examples with us.
So once we recognised that there was an international shortage of PPE, the responsibility for sourcing PPE came much more to within the local procurement teams. So I led for PPE procurement across the whole of Lancashire and South Cumbria, and led with the rest of my procurement and logistic leader colleagues. We decided from the outset that we needed to set a strategy, and the strategy was for every category of PPE that we were procuring, which was about 16 different product groups, we needed to find a local source, so that throughout the rest of the pandemic period, we were no longer at the behest of international markets and the inability to get stock into the UK. So we systematically went through the list in terms of looking to find suppliers locally who could satisfy our needs. I was delighted to be put in contact it was actually through the LEP, with a supplier called Air Filtration Solutions, who had an accreditation for FFP3 masks. That was the point at which we were all desperate to get FFP3 masks. That supplier was having difficulty with tooling and funding, and they had asked us if we could provide funding. Now, this is something very difficult for a public sector body to do. We can't write a cheque for something that we haven't received for a whole host of very valid reasons, as I'm sure you can imagine. And what I would say to you is, does everyone know the advert, which is born in Blythe but made in the Navy? Well, actually, I work in the public sector, but I was made in manufacturing industry. So actually, it was a little bit like coming into my own. And most public sector procurers don't really understand, for an SME, a purchase order with public sector's name at the top is incredibly valuable. So we agreed that we could provide purchase order to that manufacturer, and they went to the money markets. Unfortunately, didn't go to the local mutual bank, but did go to the national money markets and received the investment to move ahead with the tooling.
There's an interesting aspect there, Sharon. There's a knowledge transfer that's going from the direction of the public sector to the private sector in terms of support with finance and leveraging finance. But it's the knowledge transfer that's gone from the public sector to the private sector. That's interesting.
It is interesting, and to be honest, members of my team have also come from manufacturing. And when we were setting up, obviously we were desperate to get volume through. And one of my team members, whose background is manufacturing, went and has spent many hours with the manufacturer on the line, looking at statistical process control, how they were managing quality, how they were actually setting up the lines. So really a real team and community effort to make this work for all of us. And as far as I was concerned, it was a very, very good investment of public sector time.
Now, before I move on, Sharon, are you able to give us some numbers? How many jobs has this project supported? What kind of value are we looking at?
So the information that we've had back from our supplier is that 90 full-time, some permanent, some temporary roles have been created as a result of this in Longbridge and Preston. So it's a fantastic impact. The FFP3 masks satisfied 25% of demand across the whole of Lancashire Trust as well. So a wonderful good news story, which I'm incredibly proud to have played a small part in, to be honest.
Would I be exaggerating if I were to say that without the principles of the community wealth building model, without those principles, this contract could have just gone anywhere?
Yeah, I mean, we were looking to procure locally, and that was driven through COVID and the crisis. But actually, in fairness, COVID gave us the freedoms to go out and do that. And that was it was almost a liberation, because we were doing it for a specific purpose to manage risk to the system, and recognizing, I'm about to say, recognizing that unit cost is not always the biggest driver. In actual fact, what this demonstrated was the local supplier was just as competitive, and in those really difficult times, more competitive than other international sources. So
Thanks,
that's a really interesting equation.
Thank you. If I can move to you, Steve Fogg. Steve, you've had a life in business with BAE Systems. More recently, you helped restructure the enterprise partnership for Lancashire. Now you've got your role in Hospital Trust. What I'm interested in is this. It's, we've got an interplay here between business, between local government, health, skills, education, housing, infrastructure. None of these can work in isolation. So how do we ensure that this remains a team game, Steve?
Well, they're all linked, aren't they, Richard? I mean, if you look at what we talked about, the inequalities of wealth. Well, inequalities of wealth. What about the inequalities of health? What about the inequalities of education, inequalities of housing, inequalities of opportunity? So I think what we find generally is where they're balanced, you will find greater wealth generation, you'll find greater outcomes. Where they're imbalanced, it's really, really difficult. And unless we can deal with the inequalities of education, housing, those deprived areas, we have a problem. Now, the way I look at this is a bit like Sharon, really. It's like a great big business model, isn't it? If you look at the stress on the NHS or the stress on the police, if you can deal with the three put through, then you can lower the cost of the NHS, you can lower the cost of the police forces, etc. To do that, we've got to deal with those underlying issues and causes. And if that was modelled in some way, where we could say, if we can invest here, the wash-through effect to health, to policing, etc., can be monetarised, then we can see a very different way through. So for me, the place piece is all about partnership. And I think it is about bringing health, local authorities, local businesses, local communities together to work together to affect real change. Historically, we would tend to operate in our silos. And at the LEP, I brought loads of sectors together to sit around the same table to talk about how we lift our game as a body of people, as opposed to let's just fix one sector or this sector. And I think we need that in this space too.
But even in that environment, Steve, it's still quite difficult, even if we all agree, it's still quite difficult to bring those big units together to operate together. What's going to be the tipping point or the transitional point that makes us click?
I think we have to bring, I call it imagine, right? So our process in my mind is around imagine. So we've got to collectively imagine a different future, frankly. And if we can all imagine that different future and there's benefit for all of us, then you can start the process by which we can work together. Half the battle is, Lancashire, as you know, is quite fragmented, actually. What I've seen greatly, I've seen what Sharon's been doing across the procurement network is a real networking process, bringing people together. I've seen what the universities have been doing with IBI, with Lancaster, with East Lanc. They've started to come together to collaborate and do great things. And I think we've got to now knit business, education, colleges, schools, health. We've got to bring it together, but you've got to give them a passion and a reason to do it. And, part of the LEP stuff was how do we bring those sectors together? We'll create a vision for them that they can all buy into and they can all see their place in it. And we've got to do the same in this regard as well. And it can be done. It can be done.
Thank you, Steve. If I can come to you, Ibi, from University of Central Lancashire. You're one of our anchor institutions, and I think a broad definition of anchor institution is an organisation which is never going to go away and which has buying power. So you are a public sector body, you have procurement power. Your role is to provide skills and training and education. But what do you see as your role and the university's role in community wealth building?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Yeah, we certainly are an anchor institution, and we certainly hope we're still here in 100 or 200 years' time. I mean, universities are ancient institutions for that very reason, of course. UCLan actually sees itself as being very naturally involved in the community wealth building project, better known as a Preston model. And it's been very natural for us to be involved, because when you think about our values as a civic university, as an organisation that sees itself in its locality as making a contribution to the place in terms of its economic success, the cultural dimension, the social dimension, then it fits very, very well with the Preston model. There are kind of a number of obvious contributions we make. The first is, as an organisation, we have got some very significant spending power, as Councillor Brown's already mentioned. Annually, we spend just around £250 million, which naturally has a significant impact on the local economy of Preston, but actually also the regional economy of Lancashire. And one of the things is that in our procurement policies, where we've made it really clear that best value is not always the cheapest option. Best value actually also takes into account environmental considerations, and of course that notion around social value. And if I can just give you a quick example, for those of you who are familiar with Preston, you maybe past the university, we've put up a new building called the Engineering Innovation Centre. You know, it's got that black kind of glass across the front, and in the way we applied our procurement policy, it generated about £6 million of social value during the construction of that building, and that included about £3.5 million of spend with local businesses, and it also generated 420 weeks of apprenticeship time at levels 2, 3 and 4. So you can really kind of see how an anchor institution like the university, which is beginning to develop its estate, can make a very significant kind of beneficial impact.
That really feeds into a wider story, doesn't it, Ibby? That, you know, the inward investment story. People will want to invest in us when at a point when our skills and our abilities match the requirements of those who want to invest in us. That's your job.
That is, and you're right. There is, Richard. There is a lot of evidence to show that if an area has a higher skilled workforce, and of course universities contribute to that in terms of that level 4+, then those areas do have a greater propensity to attract inward investment. And of course, what we're trying to do here in Preston is attract that inward investment, create the wealth, retain the wealth, and then make sure that it's fairly distributed. So part of the formula is making sure that we are attractive as a place for investment, and where there's a university, of course, you know, that is a particular advantage to a place, and that clearly benefits Preston.
Well, let's make your students sticky. Let's keep them here. And
yeah,
one of the things that UCLan, University of Central Lancashire, is well known for is the great number of businesses that you create with your students. That feeds into this as well, does it not?
It does, very, very, very significantly. So that sticky bit is really important, of course. We know that where there are universities that attract their students nationally and internationally, the students, once they graduate, tend to stay. They build an affinity with place, and that's no different with Preston. You know, many of our graduates will not return home. They won't go back to the countries they originate from, or indeed other parts of the UK. They will make Preston their home, and with that, therefore, comes all the other advantages that you mentioned. You know, many do start businesses, they actually create jobs. Many contribute to existing businesses in terms of new ideas and innovation, of course, which is really, really important as well in terms of that wealth creation and retention. So there are numerous benefits that our students bring. And then there's a really obvious one, and that is, you know, as a university which has 35,000 students, many of whom actually study from the Preston campus, and of course we've got more than one campus, but for those that study here in Preston, they bring a lot of spending power with them.
They blow it all before Christmas, but they do.
Well, yeah, you just kind of see it, don't you, around the town, and you know the kind of shops and the independence that kind of generate as a result. So that they spend money, their families, when they visit, they spend money, but of course many of our students also work. And therefore they're also beneficiaries of the Preston model, you know, where if more and more of our businesses are paying the living wage, then clearly that is something that would be very attractive in terms of people coming to study in Preston rather than go elsewhere. I'd just like to kind of finish on a couple of points. Have I still got a few minutes, Richard?
You've got an hour. No, you haven't. You really haven't. I've got to move on to detail. But you make your final pitch, sir, and I'll be back to you shortly.
Okay. I just want to just concentrate on the fact that we not only see ourselves as a civic university, but also as a widening participation university. You know, we genuinely come from a perspective where we want to spread educational opportunity and the economic opportunity that then follows. So, you know, the efforts we make in terms of working with schools to work with young children in terms of raising aspirations, the way in which we operate our admissions to try and give the widest possible number of students an opportunity to join us, you know, wherever their backgrounds might be. You know, we see that as really critical in terms of that piece around spreading opportunity around and therefore the wealth around. I won't say any more around the kind of innovation, the research piece that we do and the knowledge exchange, but that work, of course, also really supports many businesses in Preston and beyond.
Thanks, Jimmy. Thank you for that. Nital Parak, I've described you as a community ambassador, and I hope that's about right. But I think what it is fair to say is you work with the communities that the Preston model is seeking to support. And I want to know, how does it feel on the ground? How does community wealth building feel to you on the ground?
So have you got an hour?
No. Well, you did have, but Ibby took it.
I get blamed for it.
Firstly, good evening to everybody. And you know, when Councillor Bailey first talked about some of the objectives of the Preston Model 2.0, one of the things he said was, or one of the questions you asked Stephen Richard was, how do you measure the success of, you know, working with the community? And that, for me, for you to measure whether you're reaching out, whether the voices are being heard, whether we're reaching out to an ethnic minority or not, it is by making content, making yourself accessible. Walking, having focus groups, experiencing, whether it's, you know, visiting places of worship where you find a lot of people from the BAME community, or attending, say, a mela, something like that. Until you engage with this community, you will never be able to measure the success. And I think the pandemic has, like in the panel just before, I think it was John who said, we need each other, and this pandemic and the community this time have proved that, because if anyone, for me, the biggest pillars who have kind of held the fort have been, you know, if we look at the Faith Covenant, if we look at some of the initiatives such as food distribution, food hubs, connecting care projects, that has been so instrumental in someone's mental health, in terms of really going to the grassroots and helping the community. And I think this is the beginning of something really exciting, really new, because like I said, in the model, one of the biggest objectives is the voice of the local community and helping them.
So this is an idea, you know, Nital, this community wealth building idea has been led by Matt and his colleagues, Matthew and his colleagues within the council. But the way you describe it is a slightly different one. It's described as it's a ground up movement for you.
Absolutely, I really do believe that. I think you know, when we use that kind of slogan that it's for the community, by the community, but before we can even reach that, let's reach the community. Let's speak to the community. Let's identify the hard to reach areas who are the voice of the community. So I think it starts very at the grassroots, and then slowly builds up for us to build this really strong relationships. And even this pandemic has taught us language barriers have been such an issue, cultural barriers have been such an issue. And I think one of the first things is let's educate one another, let's experience one another's cultures, and then eventually we're all I hope on the same hymn page in terms of building this model which is equal. I know there's a long way to go, but just that really basic communication in a different language is just the beginning.
Everything starts somewhere, though, Nital, doesn't it? And I wonder this as well. do you think the messages are landing in the communities that we're trying to reach, and how do we engage more?
So, I mean, I'm going to use the example of the Faith Covenant. I think that's been a real powerful group that have all come together and had one kind of objective. Right, we're going to help our community, and we're going to use our, for example, faith centers. Like, for example, if you went to the Hindu temple, the BAPS Mandir, or you went to the local mosque or the Buddhist center, they are speaking in a language that people can understand. If we use the example of the COVID vaccine, for example, and the BAME community being affected by it, who are the people that are going to communicate to this BAME community? It's the local faith centers. So yeah, that connection is extremely important. I think we are going towards the right direction. For example, even this initiative, the Preston model, has been translated in Urdu and going to be translated in Gujarati. These are the two most common spoken languages. And then if everybody know what the Preston model 2.0 version is, we all know what we're doing. And again, I keep saying that's the beginning, because this pandemic has taught us that communication is extremely important.
Well, I think the point is, if we can all understand the message, if we all know what the message is, we can all bang that drum together, can't we? That's the point. And if I can move on a little bit, so I'm going to come back to you, Steve Fogg. I'm really keen to, how do we, the enthusiasm in this room, the enthusiasm at this event, the enthusiasm in our chat box, I'm looking at it. Well, there's so many messages coming through. How do we harness this enthusiasm, and how do we drive the results that we really want and really demonstrate the power of this place, Steve?
You have to, it has to go beyond these conversations, Richard, doesn't it? So, you know, I've been on a number of these with you, and thankfully, those groups have stayed together in some way and started to think about actions they can work on together. I ran four roundtable events across the Fylde Coast last week, and they were businesses and education coming together to say, let's work together on it. We're not only passionate and interested, you've got to do something. So, you know, I would hope that through these events, then we're creating little groups of people that want to work together on these topics. And if you just look around this room, virtual room now, think about the networks that each of us have got to be able to affect change. And I think that's been I guess I've been lucky, really, Richard, because over my working life, I've generated so many connections, so many companies, so many networks. When I moved into the LEP, I was able to leverage them. And then now I'm doing the work on the Fylde Coast, I'm able to leverage them even more. And so I think it's not just about being enthusiastic on a program like this. It's about actually us stepping out the room and saying, let's meet up next week and think about what we could do as a group of people.
Thanks, Steve. Sharon, can I come to you? We've used the phrase, in fact, I think I tossed it in myself earlier, but we've used the phrase common sense. Does it feel like, as a buyer with so much buying power, does it feel like common sense to you? And are there restrictions on how far that common sense can take us?
Well, patently, it's common sense. And I always try to tell people procurement is just about common sense, in fairness. A lot of people try to make it sound much more complex, but actually it's about common sense, about utilising public monies, which quite frankly is all of our taxes. So it's incredibly precious. We have to make sure that we treat it in a transparent fashion where we treat everyone the same. And that's part of the difficulty in terms of being able to give local businesses priority. But my view is we bring everyone up to a level playing field so that local businesses are in a best possible position to compete and win those bids. One of the things I didn't get to was we are introducing a policy whereby 10% of our award criteria will be against social value. And 10% doesn't sound a lot, does it? But actually, most public sector bids are won or lost on less than 10%. So in reality, if our local bidders get their submissions correct, we can take it in the right direction. So yes, it absolutely is common sense. The constraints, the delightful news is things are changing at the centre. Department of Health and Social Care are making some really positive moves. So the long-term NHS plan now includes reference to procurement, procuring for social value. We've also got the NHS net zero carbon plan, which we're all having to work towards, and there's some pretty ambitious targets in there. One of which is about leadership, where every single trust has to have an executive leader for a zero carbon plan. And to be honest, within the NHS, there are so many competing priorities. Having that executive leadership is really very, very powerful. And then the one thing that I did want to say, Richard, and I'm sorry for hogging the time, is there is currently a public procurement consultation out. So there is a new green paper called Transforming Public Procurement, and the consultation period ends on the 10th of March. And I would ask anyone who's interested in this to please respond to the consultation. There's some really good stuff in there in terms of simplifying processes, and also for the first time ever, having a national public procurement statement, policy statement. And again, it explicitly references social value. So everyone out there who's interested in local and national democracy, get on and provide your consultation feedback in terms of what you're wanting that new process to look like.
Thank you, Sharon. That's fantastic. Your advert has been done. We're all in. And finally, not quite finally, but Ibi, to you, are there other common sense approaches we should be considering?
I'm sure there are, and I'm sure many will emerge. There are lots of other ideas going around in other parts of the country. You know, some of that Bristol. There's the Bristol pound, for example, as a means of retaining wealth. So there's going to be lots of other ideas of that common sense. But just to kind of say that it all feels like common sense now. But actually, if you'd have floated some of these ideas 10, 15 years ago, when the prevailing kind of ideology was very different, it's very hard to do. And I guess what we need to recognise is a lot of this feels like common sense because people like Matthew have actually put the work in, and what you're seeing is a paradigm shift in the way we think about these things. And as a result, some of these ideas now actually look like absolutely common sense. Why weren't we doing them 20, 30 years ago? But we need to recognise there's something a bit more fundamental happening here in terms of kind of ideological shifts in our thinking. Richard.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to give the last word to you, Nital, on this. What do you want to hear next from community wealth building and the Preston model?
I want the slogan for the community, by the community. I want them to, we talk about common sense, just for us to put ourselves in the shoes of those who may not understand what some of our learning objectives are, what some of the initiatives are, and not just say those with language barriers, but for children, for young people who are the next generation who brings this forward. Let's put ourselves in their shoes and how they can contribute and how they can help, because I think the young community have also really strived in terms of bringing our community forward and bringing the vision forward as well.
Thank you to you, Nital, and thank you to all our panellists again. Thank you, all of you. Now, before I invite Councillor Brown to share his final thoughts on what has been a fantastic evening, inspirational, insightful, we've got one final interview to bring to you. Preston businessman Paul Johnson of Bradley Demolition is a contributor to community wealth building and a beneficiary of the Preston model's progressive procurement. We spoke a few days ago.
Our business is a demolition and asbestos removal company. So we demolish buildings, we strip buildings out, we do structural alterations. We also remove asbestos. We hold a licence for removing asbestos.
I think we both understand what the community wealth building project is, what the Preston model is, but I got the feeling that you were already adopting those principles before it had a name.
Well, I think one of my teachers when I was younger, not a school one, when I left school, but a guy who showed me the way, so to speak. You're always trying to, best deals usually are under your nose. And so you're better off trying to do business with people you know, if you can, and you're better off making sure that you spend your money as close to home as you can.
Now, my passion, and I think you share this, my passion is to get our private sector colleagues to do the same. Would you agree?
I think they already do to a degree. I think the new Social Value Act with its specific KPIs will be a great tool if it's used with a bit of common sense. Have a look at the little guy down the road and not the big guy in another country. I don't think there's much we can't really buy in Lancashire. There's some things I can't buy. Some of the technology on the excavators, they don't make excavators in Preston. But what I can do is buy me diesel, buy me oil, buy me filters. And even if they're buying them from somewhere else, they're getting something out of it, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, my view is if you can buy it in Lancashire as a business, as a public sector organisation, and you're clear to do so, if you can buy it in Lancashire, buy it in Lancashire. And in this case, buy it in Preston.
Well, buy it in Preston first, Lancashire, then try and buy it in UK.
So that, I guess, that takes us into one of the projects that you've benefited from, I guess, with these procurement methods, is the work that you did in the town centre in Preston. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how you were able to tender for that work, win that work, and then deliver that work.
That project was won on 50% price and 50% quality, which means how you're going to carry the job out, how qualified you are to do the job and give examples, things like that. The Preston model and the local spend and local initiative formed 10% of the 50% in the quality document. So, but you had to be quite specific of how you'd achieve some local benefits. Like one of the things we did as well in our bid, we said that we'd do a free litter pick. Now, the project was in the very centre of Preston, 7-storey, multi-storey car park, and the old market halls. And it was a little bit contentious because they'd made the market people move into the new place now, because they were that happy with it. So you've got to be good neighbours. So one of the things that we said we'd do, we'd make sure we give all the workers on the project a £5 daily voucher to spend on food if they spent it on the market, chippy up the road, that kind of thing.
One of the other strands of insofar as it affects businesses like yours, I guess, is improving skills and improving work opportunities and improving those opportunities in places where those opportunities are perhaps not as well understood. How do you fit into that story, Paul?
Well, demolition, I don't know its image to other people. I still think some people look at it as, I've got a big crane with a ball on. And it's so not like that. It's so sophisticated. We're working on the decommissioning of some nuclear stuff up at Springfield in Preston at the moment. We've got massive method statements with a massive training programme. One of the things we've just done is took 5 apprentices on, but we call them trainees. And usually it's like a labouring job. So to start with, so what they do then, they've got to do a specialist awareness course. They've got to do a manual handling course, which we provide in our premises. Then they've got to go and do a touchscreen test at a centre. And then we enrol them on an MVQ. It's only a 2-stage MVQ. So after a year, they've got an MVQ and they can get a job. And in our industry, there's an opportunity. We're always looking for people to train up. And we've got a good attitude with people. We're a friendly company and I really want people to do well. My ops started in Preston. He took some price work off me, cleaning bricks, and it's where the new Morrison's is now. And now he's the operations director 12 years later. So there's opportunity.
How would you like to see the idea of the Preston model, the community wealth building model? How would you like to see it progress and where next for you as a business?
One of our big spends is on PPE, yeah, safety gear. And we spend it all with a company in Preston. And I've actually got him some contacts in my industry. It's like a business club. Yeah. Now, if the council can get some of the big employers like British Aerospace to look at local companies and be favourable to them and don't make the terms and conditions too onerous, it can't fail, really, can it? It can't fail.
Paul, you're singing my song. Paul Johnson, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your time, sir. And thank you there to the irrepressible Paul Johnson. And please welcome back now for a few final thoughts, Councillor Matthew Brown, leader of Preston City Council. Councillor Brown, we've heard from international, national, regional and local voices. What's impressed you? What's inspired you tonight?
It's all been very inspiring, to be honest. What has been inspiring is how these ideas and these policies are being implemented in many ways, in many places, and how this is an international movement. And, you know, whether it's Preston, obviously, Preston for me is the most important thing, but, you know, whether it's Preston, whether it's Yorkshire, whether it's London, whether it's New York City, people are struggling with inequality and poverty because of the way the structural inequalities that the current economic system provides. So obviously what we're seeing now is people trying to respond to that, and that's what's really exciting about it.
Thanks, Matthew. And why does this all matter to you?
Well, it matters a lot because, you know, I'm a politician who's not a particularly conventional politician. I believe that I want to win an election to implement a set of ideas and policies that will actually make people's lives better, right? If I was, you know, if I was more of an establishment politician, I wouldn't be doing this. I'm taking positions which are outside the box because I believe we need to do that to actually, you know, improve lives and make sure inequality is lessened. So for me, all of this really does matter because it shows there's an awakening. It shows that the policies, like Sharon said about, you know, about 90 jobs being created when they're buying with local companies in Preston, you know, about the UCLAN and the people being employed in the apprenticeships, what Paul said, you know, these are real people who wouldn't have got opportunities for this, right, if we didn't actually implement these policies. And it's a fact this culture is really spreading to actually an economic movement. So whether it's with trade unions, whether it's around cooperatives, living wage movements, or even just buying with local businesses or employing local people who really need to be employed, you know, that movement's there. And as Ibi said, you know, 10 years ago, these conversations weren't happening at all.
Yeah.
Or it's very much on the margins, and now it's pretty much everywhere, to be honest. So the challenge now is to bring this to scale to make sure people understand it and it makes a real big difference to people's lives.
So I understand your personal motives there. I wonder, why should it matter to all Prestonians?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to find a way to educate people that it doesn't have to be this way, that there are alternatives, whether it's in New York, some of the alternatives you mentioned there, whether it's here with the cooperative movement or whether it's, you know, buy local or whatever. It doesn't have to be this way. So it should matter to Prestonians. So we're trying to, in some ways, create a kind of like conversation that's going to inspire people to do different things, and they are doing different things. We're getting different community groups, different institutions, different policies being implemented across the piece, and that's really exciting. I mean, one thing we've just done is we've got food purchasing cooperatives that are being established in, you know, in the most deprived areas of Preston. There's going to be 3 of them under Councillor Khan. It's people of a minority community again that are doing that, and that'll save money when they buy in food for the families. So these things all matter. And it's raising that awareness where people are aware there are alternatives and we can do things differently, where people can control their own lives.
I think from my perspective as a small business owner, I think it's enormously commendable that you are bringing a business community with you on this journey as well. How do you feel about that?
Without a doubt, you know, people think this is an anti-business agenda. It's not. It's kind of like an anti-business as usual agenda. The reality is that, you know, your small independent businesses, most businesses are employed by they employ 1 or 2 people, family owned or the self-employed. You know, they're treated badly by big corporations as well, to be honest, Richard, you know. So we're trying to bring them into the coalition as well, that we can actually share wealth around and make sure that we have that coalition of ideas and actually secure a better future.
Well, we've got, I mean, just sticking with that theme very briefly, we've got 5,500 or thereabouts businesses in Preston, but there was news out just yesterday that Lancashire is the hottest county in the country for creating new businesses over the last 12, 18 months. And the hottest part of the hottest county is Preston. It can't be entirely coincidental.
No, it's not. And again, this culture amongst our institutions, the university have a fantastic business school. So we have graduates who want to stay in Preston, forming businesses, very creative there as well. Some of them cooperative businesses as well. You know, it's that culture. And then obviously through procurement as well, we do stuff around skills, getting businesses to support other businesses, business incubation. So yes, it is. But we are in a very grave situation, Richard, in the sense that, you know, what we're going to face after this pandemic is going to be very different to what people think it's going to be like March 2020. It's not. And this gives us an opportunity now to, you know, build something back better, because too many people have suffered in the last few months. You know, it's been very traumatic for everyone, and we can't go back to what we had before with the levels of inequality in Preston and elsewhere. So we've got to try. I mean, I might fail, but at least I'm going to try to make things better.
Matthew, we're almost out of time. It's been an absolute pleasure, but I wonder if you could leave our audience with a single takeaway. What would it be? What would you say to our audience that you would like them to say to their friends, neighbours and colleagues about the work that's been done here in Preston?
I just say, please read about what we're doing. We think it's really innovative and groundbreaking. Understand what we're trying to do and join us in that journey, because, you know, it doesn't have to be like this. You know, some of the lack of hope we have in our most deprived communities, you know, it can be resolved. And, you know, very inspiring hearing Phil in New York about how, you know, they're doing work with even more beaten up communities than we are, you know, and this is an international movement of solidarity to build an economy that works for everyone, not just multimillionaires and big corporations.
Thank you, Councillor Matthew Brown, and thank you to all our speakers, to Philip Thompson, to Neil McEnroy, to John McDonnell, to Rachel Shabby, to James Moore, Sharon Robson, Steve Fogg, Ibi Adia, Nital Parekh, and to Paul Johnson. And to you all for being here in your many hundreds from around the world through your Zoom and your YouTube connections. This has been the launch of Community Wealth Building 2.0, leading resilience and recovery in Preston. You can read more and learn more at prestoncommunitywealth.org. In the meantime, I've been Richard Slater, and thank you for joining us in Preston.